The snow fell thick and heavy over the Redstone Arsenal in northern Alabama that January morning in 1945. Captain Margaret Maggie Thornton stood outside the main research building, watching officers file past her into the emergency meeting. Most didn't even glance her way. Those who did offered tight smiles or small nods before hurrying inside, away from the cold and away from her. She was used to it by now. Maggie had been assigned to the Arsenal's artillery development program 18 months earlier. She held degrees in chemistry and engineering from Carnegie Mellon, graduated top of her class, and had spent 3 years working in her father's metallurgy plant before the war. None of that seemed to matter. To most of the men on base, she was just a woman playing soldier, taking up space that should have gone to a real officer. Colonel Harrison, the base commander, finally emerged from his car. He was a thick-necked man with steel-gray hair and a permanent scowl. When he saw Maggie standing by the door, his frown deepened. "Captain Thornton," he said, not slowing his stride, "this meeting is for senior staff only." "Sir, I received the same briefing notice as everyone else," Maggie replied, falling into step beside him. "My clearance level." "Your clearance level doesn't change the fact that this is a matter of extreme sensitivity," Harrison interrupted. "We're dealing with intelligence reports from the European theater, combat situations, you understand." What he meant was clear enough. This wasn't woman's work. "Sir, I've been working on the proximity fuse project for over a year," Maggie pressed. "If this meeting concerns artillery effectiveness, I should be present." Harrison stopped at the door and turned to face her. His eyes were cold. "Captain, I don't have time to debate this. Go back to your laboratory and wait for instructions. That's an order." He disappeared inside. Through the closing door, Maggie could see at least 30 officers gathering in the conference room. She recognized most of them. Some were competent. Others were political appointments or academy graduates who'd never seen combat, never worked with their hands, never designed anything more complex than a duty roster. But they were men, so they were inside and she was standing in the snow. Maggie pulled her coat tighter and walked across the compound to Building 7, where the munitions research laboratory was housed. The building was quiet this morning. Most of the technical staff had been pulled into the meeting. She had the space almost to herself. Her office was small, tucked into a corner of the 3rd floor. The walls were covered with diagrams and calculations, test results and failure reports. For the past 14 months, Maggie had been part of the team developing the proximity fuse, a revolutionary device that allowed anti-aircraft shells to explode near their targets without direct contact. It was one of the most closely guarded secrets of the war. She sat at her desk and tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting back to that closed conference room door. Something important was happening. Something that apparently didn't require her expertise, despite the fact that she knew more about artillery shell design than half the officers in that room combined. The morning dragged on. Maggie ran calculations, reviewed test data from the previous week's firing range exercises, and tried not to think about being excluded. Around 11 o'clock, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Lieutenant Robert Chen, one of the few officers who treated her as an equal, appeared in her doorway. His face was grim. "Maggie," he said quietly, "you need to hear this." "What happened in the meeting?" Chen glanced down the hallway, then stepped inside and closed the door. "We captured a German research facility outside of Aachen 2 weeks ago. The intelligence boys have been going through their files. They found something." "What kind of something?" "The Germans have been recovering our unexploded proximity fuse shells from anti-aircraft sites across Europe. They've been studying them, trying to reverse engineer the technology." Chen paused. "They've made progress, significant progress." Maggie felt her stomach tighten. The proximity fuse was supposed to be impossible to duplicate. The Americans had gone to extraordinary lengths to protect it, including orders that the fuses could only be used over water or in areas where recovery by the enemy would be impossible, if the Germans had cracked the design. "How much progress?" she asked. "That's the problem, we don't know. The facility was destroyed during the capture. Most of the research was lost, but we recovered some documents and 3 German engineers who were working on the project." Chen leaned against the wall. "They're being brought here, to Redstone. They arrive tomorrow." "Why here?" "Because this is where we're developing the next generation of proximity fuses. Colonel Harrison wants them interrogated here, where we can immediately verify any technical claims they make." He's assembling a team to handle the interrogation and analysis. Maggie understood immediately. A team I'm not part of. Chen looked uncomfortable. Harrison specifically said he wanted officers with combat experience and security expertise. He's treating this like a counterintelligence operation, not a technical review. That's insane. This is about engineering and chemistry, about understanding whether our designs have been compromised. Combat experience won't help with that. I know I tried to make that argument, so did Major Williams and a few others. Harrison shut us down, he said. Chen hesitated. He said what? He said he wasn't going to let a woman handle enemy prisoners, that it would make us look weak. Those were his exact words. Maggie closed her eyes and took a slow breath. This wasn't new. She'd faced this kind of thinking her entire career, from professors who suggested she'd be happier in teaching to factory supervisors who gave her paperwork while men half as qualified handled the real work. She'd learned to fight those battles carefully, picking her moments, building her case with evidence and results rather than arguments. But this was different. This was about the war, about American lives. If the Germans had compromised the proximity fuse technology, every anti-aircraft defense in Europe could be at risk. Every bomber crew flying missions over Germany. Every naval vessel using the fuses to defend against enemy aircraft. When do the prisoners arrive? She asked. 0900 tomorrow. They'll be held in the secure wing of Building 3. Harrison's hand-picked team will conduct the initial interrogation. After that, I don't know what the plan is. After Chen left, Maggie sat alone in her office for a long time. Outside her window, the snow continued to fall, covering the arsenal grounds in white. The compound looked peaceful, almost beautiful. It was hard to believe that somewhere across the ocean, men were dying in frozen foxholes and burning aircraft, fighting a war that had already consumed millions of lives. She thought about her brother, James. He was a bombardier on a B-17 flying missions out of England. Every time his squadron went up, they faced German anti-aircraft fire. The proximity fuses had saved countless lives by making American anti-aircraft defenses more effective, which in turn reduced the German air threat. If that technology was compromised, the balance could shift. James and thousands like him could die because of it. And she was supposed to sit in her office and wait for instructions from men who didn't even want her in the room. Maggie stood and walked to her filing cabinet. She pulled out a folder containing her notes on proximity fuse design, the technical specifications she'd memorized, the weak points in the system she'd identified during her research. If she couldn't be part of the official interrogation team, she'd have to find another way to get the information that mattered. As the daylight faded and the base grew quiet, Maggie made a decision. She would attend that interrogation tomorrow, one way or another. She would find out what the Germans knew, assess the danger to American forces, and make sure the right information reached the right people. Even if it meant defying a direct order from Colonel Harrison. Even if it meant risking her career, her commission, and everything she'd worked for. Some things were more important than following the rules. Some things were worth the risk. Tomorrow she would prove it. The prisoners arrived just after dawn. Maggie watched from a second-floor window in Building 7 as 2 military trucks pulled up to the secure wing of Building 3. Armed guards flanked the vehicles. Colonel Harrison stood waiting with his interrogation team, 6 officers Maggie recognized, all men, all looking serious and important in their dress uniforms. The prisoners emerged one by one, 3 men, thin and exhausted-looking, their civilian clothes rumpled from travel. Even from a distance, Maggie could see they weren't soldiers. These were scientists, engineers, men who'd spent the war in laboratories rather than on battlefields. The oldest looked to be in his 50s, gray-haired and stooped. The other 2 were younger, perhaps in their 30s. They were led inside quickly, disappearing into Building 3. Maggie had spent most of the night thinking through her approach. She couldn't simply walk into the interrogation. Harrison had made it clear she wasn't wanted, and forcing the issue would only get her thrown out and possibly reprimanded. She needed to be smarter than that. She needed leverage. At 0800, she made her way to the office of Dr. Samuel Weinstein, the civilian technical director of the Proximity Fuse program. Weinstein was a physicist from MIT, brought in to oversee the scientific aspects of the project. Unlike the military officers, he'd always treated Maggie with respect, valuing her contributions based on their merit rather than her gender. She found him in his office, surrounded by stacks of papers and half-empty coffee cups. He looked up when she knocked, his expression tired but welcoming. "Captain Thornton, come in. I assume you've heard about our guests." "Yes, sir. I heard they arrived this morning." Weinstein removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "This is a mess, Maggie. A real mess. If the Germans have actually managed to duplicate our proximity fuse design, the implications are enormous. But Harrison is treating this like a military interrogation instead of a technical assessment. He's got intelligence officers in there asking about troop movements and chain of command when we should be discussing circuit design and manufacturing processes." This was exactly what Maggie had hoped to hear. "Sir, I'd like to request permission to participate in the technical evaluation." Weinstein looked at her carefully. "Harrison specifically excluded you from the interrogation team." "I know, but you're the technical director. You have authority over the scientific aspects of this project. These prisoners aren't soldiers, they're engineers. Someone with actual expertise in proximity fuse design should be evaluating their claims." "You want me to override Harrison?" "I want you to do your job, sir, which is to ensure the technical integrity of this program. The colonel can run his security assessment, but the engineering evaluation should be handled by engineers." Weinstein was quiet for a moment, then he smiled slightly. "You're right, of course, but if I insert you into this process, Harrison is going to make both our lives difficult." "He already is, sir. The question is whether we're going to let that stop us from doing what's necessary." Weinstein stood and reached for his coat. "Come on, let's go see what these German engineers have to say." Building 3 was heavily guarded. 2 MPs stood at the entrance, and Maggie could see more stationed at intervals down the hallways. Weinstein led her to the secure wing on the first floor, where a conference room had been converted into an interrogation space. Inside, Colonel Harrison stood with his team, facing the 3 German prisoners. An interpreter sat off to the side. The atmosphere was tense, formal. Harrison was in the middle of speaking when Weinstein opened the door. "Colonel, excuse the interruption," Weinstein said. "I'm bringing Captain Thornton into the technical assessment." Harrison's face darkened. "Dr. Weinstein, we discussed this. The interrogation team has already been selected." "This isn't an interrogation, Colonel. It's a technical evaluation. These men are engineers, not enemy combatants. Captain Thornton is one of my senior technical officers. Her expertise is required for any meaningful assessment of the threat to our proximity fuse program." "I don't care what title you give it. This is a sensitive security matter." "Which is exactly why we need proper technical oversight," Weinstein interrupted, his voice firm. "You can continue with your security assessment, but the engineering evaluation will be conducted by qualified engineers. That's not negotiable." For a moment, the 2 men stared at each other. Maggie held her breath, waiting to see who would back down. Finally, Harrison gave a curt nod. "Fine, but she follows my protocols. No unauthorized communication with the prisoners. Everything goes through the official channels." "Agreed," Weinstein said. Maggie stepped into the room. The other officers watched her with expressions ranging from surprise to disapproval. She ignored them and focused on the 3 German prisoners. The oldest of them was watching her with curious eyes. When their gazes met, he nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. The other 2 barely seemed to notice her arrival. They looked exhausted, defeated. "These are the engineers we captured from the research facility outside Aachen," Harrison said, his tone making it clear he resented having to brief her. "Dr. Klaus Richter, the senior researcher. Dr. Hans Mueller and Dr. Friedrich Weber, his assistants. They've been working on analyzing American proximity fuses for the past 18 months. Maggie studied the 3 men. Dr. Richter, the older one, had the bearing of an academic, someone more comfortable with equations than warfare. Mueller and Weber looked younger, probably brought into the program from universities or industrial positions when the war started. "What have they told you so far?" she asked. "Nothing useful," one of Harrison's officers said. "They claim they're willing to cooperate, but every time we ask for specifics, they say the technical details were lost when the facility was destroyed." "That's convenient," Harrison muttered. Maggie looked at Dr. Weinstein. "May I?" He nodded. "Go ahead." She turned to the prisoners. "Dr. Richter, I understand you were attempting to reverse engineer the American proximity fuse. Can you describe your general approach to the problem? The interpreter translated. Dr. Richter responded in German, his voice soft but clear. The interpreter relayed his words. We began by analyzing recovered shell fragments. The challenge was understanding the triggering mechanism without access to intact specimens. Most of the shells we recovered had been damaged by impact or detonation. So you were working from incomplete data, Maggie said. Yes, we had to reconstruct the design based on fragments and observed performance characteristics. And did you succeed? Richter hesitated. Then he said something in German that made the interpreter pause. The young man looked uncomfortable as he translated. He says they made significant progress, but he refuses to provide details until he knows who he's speaking with. Colonel Harrison stepped forward. You're speaking with officers of the United States Army. That's all you need to know. With respect, Colonel, Maggie said. He's a scientist. He wants to know if he's talking to someone who understands the work. She looked directly at Richter. Tell him I'm a chemical engineer. I've been working on proximity fuse development for over a year. I understand resonant cavity design, vacuum tube miniaturization, and the power supply challenges inherent in shell-based electronic systems. The interpreter translated. Something changed in Richter's expression. He leaned forward slightly and spoke again, more animated now. He says that if you understand those things, then you know the real secret of the proximity fuse isn't the radio trigger itself. The real innovation is the rugged miniaturization, making electronic components that can survive the enormous acceleration forces when the shell is fired. The interpreter paused. He wants to know if you've solved the problem of component mounting. Maggie felt a chill run down her spine. Component mounting was indeed one of the most challenging aspects of proximity fuse design. The shells experienced forces of up to 20,000 Gs when fired. Standard electronic components would simply shatter. The American solution involved special mounting techniques and custom-designed vacuum tubes. It was one of the most classified aspects of the entire program. And somehow, Dr. Richter knew to ask about it. What mounting approach did your team develop? Maggie asked carefully. Richter smiled slightly. He said something to the interpreter who looked even more uncomfortable. He says he'll answer that question, but only if you answer his first. How did you solve the mounting problem? That's classified information, Harrison snapped. You don't get to interrogate us. But Maggie was thinking. If the Germans had truly made progress on reverse engineering the proximity fuse, they would have had to solve the same problems the American team had faced. The question wasn't just about gathering intelligence. It was a test. Richter was trying to determine if she was really an engineer or just another officer playing games. Dr. Richter, she said slowly, I think you already know how we solved it. You've studied our shell fragments. You've seen the mounting configurations. What you want to know is whether I actually understand the engineering or if I'm just reciting talking points from a briefing. The interpreter translated. Richter's smile widened. He responded at length, speaking directly to Maggie now, his eyes bright with scientific interest despite the circumstances. He says you're correct, the interpreter relayed. He says the mounting solution was actually not difficult to deduce once they understood the basic principle. The real challenge his team faced was the power supply, battery technology that could function reliably under extreme acceleration and temperature variations. They tried 17 different approaches before. The interpreter paused. Before the facility was captured. How close did you come to a working design? Maggie asked. Richter's expression turned sad. He spoke quietly and the interpreter's voice dropped as well. He says they were very close, perhaps 2 months from a functional prototype, but it no longer matters. The work is gone. The facility was destroyed. His notes, his team's research, everything was lost. Maggie studied his face. There was genuine regret there, but also something else. Something that didn't quite fit. He was lying. Not about everything. The research had clearly happened. The progress was real, but something about his story was false. She could see it in the way his eyes shifted when he mentioned the destroyed facility, the slight tension in his shoulders. The question was, what was he lying about, and why? The interrogation continued for another 2 hours. Colonel Harrison and his team pressed the German engineers for information about their research facility, their chain of command, other scientists who might have been involved in the program. Dr. Richter and his assistants answered most questions readily enough, but whenever the conversation turned to technical specifics about their proximity fuse research, They became vague and apologetic. The records were destroyed, they said. The details were lost. Maggie watched and listened carefully. Something about their story didn't add up. When they finally broke for lunch, she pulled Dr. Weinstein aside in the hallway. "They're hiding something." "I noticed that too," Weinstein said quietly. "But Harrison's approach isn't helping. He's treating them like enemy soldiers instead of scientists. People like Richter don't respond to intimidation. They respond to intellectual respect." "Then let me talk to them alone, without Harrison breathing down everyone's neck." Weinstein looked doubtful. "Harrison will never allow that." "He doesn't have to know. Give me 30 minutes with them. Just me, the interpreter, and the prisoners. I think I can get Richter to open up." "And if Harrison finds out?" "Then he finds out. But right now we're not learning anything useful. These men have information that could affect the safety of every American soldier in Europe. We need that information, sir. We need to know what the Germans really discovered about our proximity fuses." Weinstein was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. 30 minutes. I'll keep Harrison busy with a briefing on our latest test results. But Maggie, be careful. If Richter is hiding something significant, there's probably a reason for it. That afternoon, while Colonel Harrison and his team were occupied in a different part of the building, Maggie returned to the interrogation room with just the interpreter, a young corporal named Thomas Martinez. The 3 German engineers looked surprised when she entered alone. "Gentlemen," Maggie said, waiting for Martinez to translate, "I'd like to continue our conversation from this morning. But this time, I'd like to speak as one engineer to another, not as captors and prisoners." Dr. Richter studied her face for a long moment. Then he spoke to Martinez in German. The corporal translated. "He asks what you want to know." "The truth," Maggie said simply. "You told us your research was destroyed when the facility was captured, but I don't think that's completely accurate. I think you're protecting something." Richter's expression didn't change, but she saw his assistants, Mueller and Weber, exchange quick glances. She was right. "Here's what I think happened," Maggie continued, speaking slowly so Martinez could keep up with the translation. "I think your team did make significant progress on understanding the proximity fuse, maybe more progress than you're admitting. And I think when you knew the Allies were coming, you didn't destroy everything. You hid something. Research notes, prototype designs, maybe even working models. You hid them somewhere the invading forces wouldn't find them." Dr. Richter sat very still. His face was unreadable. "The question is why," Maggie went on. "Why would you hide your own research from your own military? Unless," she paused, working through the logic, "unless you knew the war was lost, unless you were more interested in preserving your work for after the war than in helping the Nazi war effort." This time, Richter's reaction was unmistakable. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition that she'd seen through his careful deception. He spoke at length in German. Martinez translated, his voice uncertain. "He says you're very perceptive. He says that yes, he and his team realized months ago that Germany would lose the war. They're scientists, not soldiers. They have no loyalty to Hitler or the Nazi regime. They were forced to work on military research, but they had no desire to see their discoveries used to kill more people." "So you sabotaged your own project?" Maggie asked. "Not sabotaged, delayed. We worked slowly. We made our progress seem more difficult than it was, and when we knew the end was near, yes, we hid our most important findings." Richter leaned forward. "We hid them because we didn't want them destroyed, not by the Nazis and not by the Allies either. We wanted them preserved for peacetime, for after the war when scientists could work together again instead of trying to kill each other." "Where," Maggie asked, "where did you hide your research?" Richter shook his head. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you're going to use it to build more weapons. On whether this knowledge will be used to kill more people, or whether it might serve some better purpose." Maggie felt a flash of frustration. "Dr. Richter, with respect, you don't get to dictate the terms here. You're prisoners of war. The research you hid could be vital to American security." "Could it?" Richter interrupted, his English suddenly clear despite his heavy accent. "Or will it simply escalate the killing? We've already seen what happens when scientists put their knowledge in service of war. We've seen the rockets, the fire bombs, the poison gases. Each side tries to build something more terrible than the last. When does it end?" Martinez looked startled that Richter spoke English. Maggie realized the older man had been pretending not to understand, listening to everything that was said without anyone knowing. "It ends when we win," Maggie said quietly. When the Nazis are defeated and this war is over. But until then, American soldiers are dying. My brother is a bombardier. He flies missions over Germany every week. The proximity fuses we developed give our anti-aircraft batteries a better chance of defending our air bases, which means fewer German planes attacking our bombers, which means James has a better chance of coming home alive. So yes, Dr. Richter, this matters. It matters very much. Richter was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You have a brother fighting in the war. I had a son. He was killed at Stalingrad. He was 19 years old. He didn't want to be a soldier. He wanted to be a teacher. But the state decided otherwise, and now he's dead." "I'm sorry," Maggie said, and meant it. "So am I sorry for my son, sorry for your brother, sorry for all the young men dying in this insane war. Which is why I will not simply hand over research that will be used to kill more of them, regardless of which flag they serve." Maggie took a deep breath. She understood his position, even sympathized with it. But they were running out of time. Harrison would be back soon, and if he discovered she'd been conducting an unauthorized interrogation, there would be consequences. "Dr. Richter," she said, "I can't promise that your research won't be used for military purposes. I can't end the war by myself. But I can promise that if you share what you know, I'll make sure it's understood accurately. I'll make sure the right people know about the real dangers and the real implications, not just the military applications, but the full picture." "And why should I trust you?" "Because I'm the only one asking the right questions," Maggie said. "Because every other officer in this building sees you as an enemy first and a scientist second. Because I understand what you were trying to do, even if I don't entirely agree with it." Richter looked at his two assistants. They spoke briefly in German, a rapid exchange she couldn't follow. Finally, Richter turned back to her. "Very well, but I will not tell you where we hid the research. Instead, I will tell you what we discovered. If you truly understand the engineering, you'll be able to judge whether we actually compromised your design or not." "That's acceptable," Maggie said, pulling out a notebook. Over the next 20 minutes, Dr. Richter described his team's work in careful detail. They had indeed managed to partially reverse engineer the proximity fuse design, but with significant limitations. Their version required larger, heavier components and wasn't as reliable as the American model. More importantly, they'd never solved the power supply problem completely. Their batteries failed at high temperatures, which meant the fuses would be unreliable in tropical climates or during summer operations. "So your design wouldn't have worked as well as ours," Maggie said, taking notes. "Correct. We would have needed another 6 months, perhaps longer, to match your performance standards. But the war will be over long before that." "Then why hide the research at all, if it wasn't functional?" "Because it was close enough," Richter said. "Close enough that in peacetime, with proper resources and facilities, it could be completed. Close enough that it represents real scientific knowledge, not just weapons design. We hid it because knowledge has value beyond its military applications." Maggie was about to respond when the door opened. Colonel Harrison stood in the doorway, his face red with anger. Dr. Weinstein was behind him, looking apologetic. "Captain Thornton," Harrison's voice was dangerously quiet, "what exactly do you think you're doing?" "Conducting a technical assessment, sir, as authorized by Dr. Weinstein." "I authorized you to participate in the official interrogation. I did not authorize you to conduct private conversations with enemy prisoners." "Sir, Dr. Richter was providing important information about." "I don't care what he was providing. You violated security protocols, you dismissed the guards, you conducted an unsupervised interrogation without proper authorization." Harrison stepped into the room. "Corporal Martinez, you're dismissed. Captain Thornton, you're coming with me." "Colonel, please let me explain." "Now, Captain, that's an order." Maggie closed her notebook and stood. She glanced at Dr. Richter, who was watching the scene with sad eyes. As she passed him, he said quietly in English, "Be careful, Captain. Men like him don't forgive challenges to their authority." "I know," she replied just as quietly. Harrison led her down the hallway to his office. Dr. Weinstein tried to follow, but Harrison shut the door in his face. Once they were alone, the colonel turned on her. "I should have you court-martialed," he said. "I should have you removed from this program and sent to count supplies at some depot in Kansas. What possessed you to think you could ignore my direct orders?" "I was trying to get information that could save American lives," Maggie said. keeping her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. You were showboating, trying to prove you're as good as the male officers, trying to make me look bad. No, sir, I was trying to do my job. Dr. Richter was withholding information. I managed to get him to talk. He explained their research approach, their limitations, and the actual threat level to our proximity fuse program. And you think you're qualified to assess that information? You think your judgment is better than mine? In technical matters, yes, sir, I do. The words were out before she could stop them. Harrison's face went purple. For a moment, Maggie thought he might actually strike her. Instead, he walked to his desk and picked up a phone. "Get me General Patterson at the Pentagon," he said to whoever answered. Then, covering the receiver, he looked at Maggie. "You're done, Captain. You're off this project. I'm requesting your immediate transfer to a non-technical position. You'll be lucky if you finish this war with your commission intact." Maggie felt her heart sink, but she kept her back straight and her voice level. "Sir, before you do that, you should read my notes from the interrogation. Dr. Richter revealed significant information about the German research program, information that changes our assessment of the threat." "I don't care about your notes. You obtained them through unauthorized means. They're inadmissible." "They're accurate." "They're worthless." Harrison spoke into the phone. "Yes, General, I need to discuss a personnel matter. It's urgent." Maggie stood there, watching her career crumble, and wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. She'd gotten the information they needed. She discovered the truth about the German research. But if Harrison had her transferred before she could share that information with anyone who mattered, it would all be for nothing. The door opened. Dr. Weinstein entered, and behind him was a man Maggie didn't recognize. He wore a civilian suit and carried a briefcase stamped with official Pentagon seals. "Colonel Harrison," the man said, "I'm Robert Caldwell from the War Department's Technical Intelligence Division. I believe you have some German engineers here that I need to interview." Harrison looked annoyed at the interruption. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm in the middle of something. Can this wait?" "I'm afraid not. I've been sent by General Grove's office. The Manhattan Project has an interest in these prisoners and their research. I need to speak with them immediately, and I understand Captain Thornton has been conducting technical assessments. I'll need her full report as well." Harrison's expression shifted from anger to confusion. "The Manhattan Project? What does atomic research have to do with proximity fuses?" Caldwell smiled thinly. "That's classified, Colonel, but I can tell you that Captain Thornton's expertise makes her uniquely qualified to assist in my assessment. I'll need her assigned to my team for the duration of my investigation." And just like that, everything changed. Robert Caldwell's arrival transformed the entire situation. Within an hour, he'd effectively taken control of the German engineers' interrogation, pulling authority that superseded even Colonel Harrison's command. The Manhattan Project, it seemed, carried weight that no one was willing to challenge. Maggie found herself in a small conference room with Caldwell and Dr. Weinstein, trying to understand what was happening. "I don't work for the Manhattan Project," she said carefully. "I'm not even sure why they'd be interested in proximity fuse research." Caldwell set his briefcase on the table and opened it. Inside were files stamped with security classifications Maggie had never seen before. "You don't work for the project directly, Captain, but your research has implications that extend beyond artillery shells. The miniaturization techniques you've been developing, the ruggedized electronics, the remote triggering mechanisms, these have applications in other areas. Areas that General Groves is very interested in." "You mean atomic weapons?" Dr. Weinstein said quietly. Caldwell didn't confirm or deny it. "I mean technologies that could be critical to ending this war. Dr. Richter's team was apparently working on similar miniaturization challenges. If they've made breakthroughs we haven't considered, we need to know about it." "He told me their research wasn't complete," Maggie said. "They were still months away from a functional design." "Tell me everything he said. Leave nothing out." For the next hour, Maggie recounted her conversation with Dr. Richter in meticulous detail. Caldwell listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound journal. When she finished, he sat back and was quiet for a long moment. "The hidden research," he finally said. "Did he tell you where it is?" "No, he said he wouldn't reveal that unless he was convinced it wouldn't be used for more weapons." "Do you believe him? About hiding the research, I mean. Could it be a bluff?" Maggie considered the question. I don't think it's a bluff. The way he talked about it, the way his assistants reacted. They definitely hid something. Whether it's as significant as Richter claims, I can't say for certain. But it's real. Caldwell Close.